Hello and welcome. In my opinion, Go-Man, written and illustrated by Bill Widener, comfortably sits between the darker tone of The Dark Knight Returns and the satirical brutality of Brat Pack. It's like a logical missing link between those two works. And like both, it is a commentary on the times it was produced. Spiritually, it contains elements that would appear in Alan Moore's 1963 and Supreme's Story of the Year, long before either project was published. Specifically, the past meeting the future and the conflict between the two. The main focus of this video is on the 3-issue story from Nerve magazine, published in 1986. Although Go-Man would have a brief 4-issue series in 1989, with a conclusion to that series serialized in Caliber Presents in 1990. While those issues are interesting on their own, it's the first 3 installments in Nerve that deserve recognition. There's something about that 3-issue story that just works. Certainly, at face value, the artwork appears crude and perhaps a touch sloppy, which may turn many off. Admittedly, it is functional, but not overly appealing. At the same time, the basics of storytelling are there. The images do flow from one panel to the next, maintaining a visual continuity throughout. It's not at the level of professionalism one might expect from a mainstream comic, but it's a decent example of an upstart, underground artist with developing skills, trying to illustrate a story they are passionate about telling. For that alone, any flaws in the artwork are easy to overlook. In my opinion, the artwork is just fine. Sure, it's a little unpolished, but at the same time, there's an enthusiasm and a vitality that comes through every panel. It has a very old-school punk aesthetic. It's raw and challenging. It comes straight from the heart. Much like a classic punk song, underneath the surface-level noise, there's a very compelling story with a message that resonates. The story is about the television superstar, Go-Man, as he faces N, a new kind of villain with a traumatic past and powers that are far more than Go-Man can handle. It opens with Go-Man taking down a gang of criminals. He stops this crime in his usual fun-loving fashion, but he also has to resort to actual violence. And in the process, he gets wounded, which is unusual. Go-Man suspects his technological toys are less effective than they once were. While meeting with his adoring public, a lone fanatic begins to yell out slogans. This fanatic hits Go-Man with a tomato before launching into a tirade about the new face of justice, who he claims is a mysterious woman known as N. We then meet N, as she dispenses her brand of new justice on a man that victimizes prostitutes. Needless to say, her form of justice is the type where the punishment equals the crime. Go-Man returns to his base of operations, where he's informed about N and her growing body count. However, Go-Man is feeling burnt out and not convinced he's capable of taking on anyone, let alone a superpowered psychopath. His chief of operations, Dr. Oster, insists Go-Man is the only one available to face this threat. Furthermore, he strongly suggests Go-Man needs to meet violence with more advanced violence. The threat of N is too great for him to try and defeat with his usual arsenal of toys and gimmicks. Oster argues that the times have changed and Go-Man needs to change with them. Go-Man is unconvinced. Feeling a bit lost, Go-Man visits his mentor, Dr. Venus. Venus tells Go-Man to stick to his ways. He advises him to forget about the external pressure from the corporate overlords and to follow his heart and stick to his principles. Those instincts have gotten him to where he is now, so trust them. After this meeting, Dr. Venus is murdered, and the culprit appears to be N. The second part opens with N inspiring another fanatic using trauma and mind control. It then cuts to the funeral of Dr. Venus and a grieving Go-Man dealing with his loss. While N continues to dispense her brand of justice, Go-Man's support staff meet with him to discuss options. Everything they know about N is conjecture. It's believed she has major financial backing, and her powers are the result of an experimental drug that increases her psychic ability. Go-Man listens to the company pitch an array of new weapons before dismissing their suggestions and telling them how he will approach the problem N represents. The remainder of the issue switches to N. It's learned she's backed by a company that competes with Go-Man's company. She does, in fact, inject a drug to greatly enhance her power. However, the company has decided N isn't on message. Her bloody crusade is off-brand, so to speak, so they will no longer support her. In response, N takes what she needs. The company attempts to assassinate her while she's in a weakened state, but that doesn't go well for them. N walks the streets, fully charged, and sees Go-Man's public challenge to meet. The final episode is Go-Man and N meeting. Meanwhile, a member of Go-Man's support team investigates N's origin. N is the product of an area of research abandoned by Go-Man's financial backers. A competing corporation took this research and hired a brilliant supervillain to finish the project. Using science and sorcery, this villain took a traumatized, powerless woman and gave her the ability to shape the world as she pleases. She has no weaknesses. She is an unstoppable force of nature. She is the future. The fight between Go-Man and N is a brutal display of violence. Go-Man throws everything he possesses at N, but those gimmicks barely have an effect. Desperate and in a panic, Go-Man uses an experimental weapon on N. This releases her trauma, and in a state of frenzy, she literally tears Go-Man apart. It ends with Go-Man admitting N is powerful, beautiful, and superior in every way. She is far more than he could ever hope to be. Yet, if she's so evolved, if she's so superior, then why does she act like a brutal savage, controlled by her own fear? How is that better than what Go-Man represents? She's nothing new. She's the same old violent ways, dressed up in different clothing. Faced with this dying critique, N walks away, leaving a battered Go-Man to collapse, uttering, "What a waste. What a sad waste." Go-Man has a bunch of technological toys in his crime-fighting arsenal. His mask is a perpetually grinning, holographic face. He's upbeat and stylish. He's a cool cat hipster who seems unflappable and way too awesome. Go-Man's escapades are documented for a very popular TV series, The Go Show, during which he advocates productivity as a healthy pursuit for all citizens. Naturally, the show promotes merchandise, which generates a good income for the corporation that sponsors him. On one level, he can be seen as a shill or a socialist corporate puppet, but we do get to see behind the mask and realize his agenda is pure. He's not a sold-out, cynical TV star. He really believes in what he does. Go-Man's catchphrase, "relax," is probably borrowed from the song of the same name by Frankie Goes to Hollywood. That seemed pretty obvious at the time, since the song was a massive hit in 1984, so the two being the same couldn't have been a coincidence. The song also inspired a hugely popular t-shirt with the phrase, "Frankie say relax." So thematically, this ties into the merchandising element of the Go-Man TV show. Go-Man's secret identity is Lyndon Foley. Behind the scenes, Lyndon is rather dismissive of his corporate overlords, and he pushes back against their interference. Due to his popularity, he has the clout to assure he doesn't get polluted by a corporate agenda. However, there's the subtle indication that the corporation might be trying to sabotage the hero's tools in order to influence him into a different direction, so his support system may be working against him. The main villain, N, is very street level. Her methods are brutal and focused on the seedier side of crime. She's not really a villain per se, she's a vigilante. More to the point, she's a fanatic that believes in her cause. That being said, N is not a misguided individual. She is focused and rejects any attempts to control her actions. Also, it has to be noted that N's catchphrase, for lack of a better term, is the saying, "N is N," which is a play on the objectivist principle, A is A. In plain terms, there is an objective definition of good and evil, and N is the one who provides that definition, although her objectivity is definitely questionable. N is blamed for the murder of Go-Man's mentor. It appears as if this is N's declaration that she has arrived and will not be ignored. Go-Man, and by extension, the entire city of Hyperia, will acknowledge her presence. While not explicit, it's heavily implied the organization that supports N is the one who committed the murder, and it was done without her knowledge or consent. Their motivation was to raise N's profile to a point where Go-Man would have to confront her, then be publicly humiliated and replaced by her. She is, from a business perspective, the new face of justice in Hyperia. She is the future of entertainment. What makes this story work is the conflict between two styles. Go-Man represents the fun-loving 60s type of hero, and is a product of the evolving, grim and gritty 80s. Go-Man is motivated by a sense of adventure and fun, and is motivated by trauma and the need to deliver a message. When they finally meet, when these two styles collide, N destroys Go-Man with a level of brutality that is stomach-churning. And here's where the series delivers its most powerful, enduring message. Before N delivers a killing blow, Go-Man spitefully acknowledges she is superior in every way. He states N has all this power and all this potential, but she wastes it on childish acts of violence. She's a bunch of rhetoric with no substance. He may be physically weaker, but he has the strength of character to avoid being controlled by his fears. So in the end, who is the better person? This is the most cunning metatextual criticism concerning contemporary comics and the developing grim and gritty trend. Go-Man is the joy and wonder of the medium, personified by the cheerful comics of the 1960s, while N is a hammer that seems motivated to exterminate all the elements that made comic books appealing. Within the medium, the ability to explore rampant violence and hardcore themes doesn't necessarily imply a level of maturity. In fact, it might suggest the opposite. These new 80s comic stories are simple power fantasies disguised as evolved visual entertainment. But they're not entertaining. They're creatively bankrupt, filled with unnecessary violence, while projecting the facade of something deep and meaningful. Yet it's surface level, pandering, and ultimately meaningless. Even 30+ years later, that message is powerful, and a very subtle critique of the times. It may even be a timeless message concerning the nature of entertainment. Go-Man is also a critique of television. Nowadays, one might say the most influential presence is media in general, which includes streaming services such as TikTok and YouTube, as well as social media platforms such as Elon Musk's vanity project and Instagram, and of course, the vast amount of clickbait news sources. But in the 80s, the most influential medium was television. It was the source of everyone's news, information, entertainment, and infotainment. Like the media of today, it was also the most prolific source of misinformation and disinformation. It shaped public opinion. This is an element that runs throughout the series. It's very aware that television has the capability to influence the public. What the viewing audience sees is carefully crafted and packaged. Again, using a modern example, the Go Show is a reality show. Sure, it looks real, and the participants really go through the paces within the challenges, but it's all manufactured, it's all structured, it's barely reality. It's been edited for maximum effect. In this respect, Go-Man, like American Flag before it, has amazing foresight. It's aware that if one desires to influence society, one has to be a television star. While television itself, as a singular source of media, may not be relevant today, the manufacturing of reality for the sake of entertainment and influence has only gotten more prevalent. There was a 2-year hiatus between Go-Man's final appearance in Nerve and the first issue of the ongoing series. During that time, the creator, Bill Widener, attempted to self-publish a Go-Man series, but the orders for that issue were too low to justify actually publishing it. The Comico editor, Bob Schreck, expressed interest in having that company publish the title. But before the deal could be made, Schreck left the company. Soon thereafter, Comico went out of business, and that killed any publishing plans. Eventually, Widener met Gary Reed of Caliber Press, and he agreed to publish a Go-Man series. Unfortunately, the series was short-lived. It came to an end with the 4th issue. In the final issue, Widener avoids addressing why the series flopped, but he mentioned that his intent was to keep the protagonist in a coma for the first 9 issues, which might not have been the best plan, all things considered. Had the series begun with a reprint of the Nerve series, thus getting people invested in the character, it might have allowed him the time to build up the political intrigue and establish all the moving parts that work in secret behind Go-Man, which was what Widener was doing in those 4 issues. But for those coming in cold, which was likely just about every reader, beginning the series with the main character near death and comatose was not a good introduction to Go-Man. In those issues, we are being told about the character rather than hearing directly from the character himself. Only one plot beat from the ongoing series would be included in the Caliber Presents run. Everything else, all the side characters and support staff, would be jettisoned so the series could end with Go-Man being restored. It's very bare bones and slightly disappointing, only because Widener didn't have the opportunity to tell the story with all the layers he intended. Still, he gave the fans a sense of closure. Go-Man didn't remain in a coma limbo until the end of time. He returned and is, presumably, alive and well and still fighting crime with a fistful of fun. At least, I hope that's exactly what he's doing. He deserves that fate. Additionally, Widener redeems the character N. She discovers that she was manipulated into confronting Go-Man, and the fight with him served no purpose. There was no meaning to their battle. It was an empty gesture that proved nothing. It reaffirmed Go-Man's accusation before he collapsed. Faced with this knowledge, she feels morally obligated to correct her error. Presumably, had the series continued, Widener would have completed the meta-commentary with Go-Man and N having a reconciliation. They would have found a common ground where both exist, not in opposition, but with an understanding and a level of respect. N may have been the future, but her existence wasn't dependent on the elimination of the past, as exemplified by Go-Man. There is another, better way, and perhaps they would have discovered it together. We'll never know, but I like to think it would have landed on a positive message. In the end, Go-Man is not a series with missed potential. It delivered on its promise, especially the story published in Nerve magazine. After that, the ongoing series had the best intentions, but it lacked the support to get to where it was going. So it fell through the cracks, and remains a great story waiting for an audience. I'd like to, if I may, add a personal note here at the end. Go-Man had a story that resonated and influenced me. It's the kind of story that came along at the right time and hit all the beats that appealed to my developing sensibilities. It was disaffected, but not cynical. It had a point of view, but it didn't demand you accept it. There were layers, but one could read it as a straightforward adventure and not miss anything. It was passionate about the medium and its history, but it was self-aware and it acknowledged the changes that were taking place around it. And, despite the downbeat statement at the end, there was hope. There was always hope. Go-Man could have been a boring declaration about how comics had lost its innocence, and now it was growling its way through adolescence into maturity. Instead, it was an example of what the medium could be when it included mature themes, but not at the expense of fun and wonder, and discovery. With that, go forth, read, create, be the future. Thank you for watching, or listening, whatever the case may be. Additional thanks to all my fine supporters on YouTube and Patreon. Please support this channel by subscribing or giving this video a like and leaving a comment. Extra special thanks to John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Phil Sagan, Corey Drew, L.S. Gregor, Alexa Zernish, Brian Deaton, Johnny Lim, Steve White, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient.